Marilyn Jackson was publicly humiliated by Officer Brian Whitman, who used his badge to deliver a cruel, biased insult. His arrogance and misuse of authority left her shocked and powerless, her dignity under attack in broad daylight. But just as the tension peaked, her son Jamal arrived in full SWAT gear, calm, prepared, and unafraid, ready to confront injustice head-on. And just wait until you see how the situation flipped, leaving Whitman accountable and Marilyn's courage and justice fully restored. Marilyn Jackson had spent the better part of her morning navigating the crowded aisles of Cedarville's small-town grocery store. It was a Saturday ritual she had grown accustomed to, moving with quiet determination between the carts and displays, careful not to let the chaos overwhelm her. For Marilyn, these trips were never just about groceries. They were a responsibility she carried for her family, a small ritual of care and provision. With her list checked twice, she maneuvered her cart toward the exit, humming a soft tune under her breath, feeling the faint satisfaction of a mission accomplished. The parking lot was bright under the autumn sun, leaves scattered along the asphalt, hinting at the coming chill. Marilyn parked her car near the edge of the lot, carefully balancing the bags as she lifted them from the cart. The weight of the last bag tugged at her arm, but she managed, stacking them neatly in the trunk. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead and allowed herself a small smile. For a moment, she felt content. A simple morning, ordinary, peaceful. That sense of calm shattered the instant she heard the sharp click of polished boots on asphalt. Officer Brian Whitman appeared as if from nowhere, his uniform crisp, his stance rigid. There was a deliberate precision in the way he approached, like a predator measuring its prey. "Don't you know how to park, lady?" His words sliced through the air with a sharpness that made Marilyn freeze. His tone wasn't just critical. It carried the weight of authority weaponized against her, each syllable coated in condescension. Marilyn's first instinct was to step back, to explain herself, but she quickly reminded herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. She straightened, meeting his gaze politely, hoping that a calm demeanor would diffuse the situation. "Officer, is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. For a brief moment, she thought perhaps he would realize his approach was unnecessary and move on. That brief hope evaporated instantly. Whitman's eyes narrowed, scanning her as though measuring her worth beneath his own. Then he muttered something under his breath, but it wasn't quiet enough to escape the ears of those passing by. It was a remark steeped in bias, a jab that made Marilyn's stomach twist. She felt the weight of humiliation pressing down on her shoulders, heavier than the groceries she had just lifted. Her breath caught in her throat, a mix of disbelief and rising fury. The world seemed to tilt, the autumn sun suddenly glaring too brightly in her eyes. Shock flooded her first. How could someone entrusted with public service, sworn to protect, demean her so openly? Then came anger, fierce and unrelenting. How dare he treat her this way in broad daylight, with strangers watching, as if her presence in the parking lot made her vulnerable to his judgment? The audacity of it, the arrogance of a uniform, a badge, a title twisted into a weapon of ridicule, fueled a fire inside her. Her hands clenched around the strap of her purse as she fought the urge to raise her voice, to make him accountable right then and there. Yet, beneath the anger, Marilyn felt a creeping sense of disbelief, a bitter sting at the unfairness of it all. She had taught herself to navigate the world with patience and resilience, but patience felt fragile against the weight of such blatant disrespect. Around her, the hum of other shoppers continued as if nothing were wrong, and the incongruity made her blood boil further. She realized in that moment that this was about more than groceries, more than a parking misstep. It was about dignity, respect, and the principle that no one should be subjected to prejudice while going about their day. Marilyn stood her ground, eyes steady on Whitman. The anger didn't subside. It solidified into something she could harness, a resolve forming at the center of it. This wasn't a confrontation she would ignore. She would not shrink or bow. She would confront this injustice, not with threats, but with the clarity of her presence and the certainty that respect was hers to command. And as she lifted the final bag into the trunk, a silent promise formed in her mind. She would not be diminished. Not now. Not ever. Marilyn Jackson felt her chest tighten as the words echoed in her mind. The sting of humiliation settled deep, spreading like a shadow that clung to her shoulders. She had endured small slights before, subtle remarks, sideways glances, moments that tested her patience, but never had she been confronted with something so raw, so blatant, and never had it come from someone sworn to uphold the law. Officer Whitman's uniform, once a symbol of protection, now seemed like a mask for intimidation. The weight of his authority pressed down on her, a reminder that the world could turn against her in an instant, even when she had done nothing wrong. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the fear lingered at the edges of her mind. Her son, Jamal, had left for college months ago, and the house felt emptier than it had in years. Memories of his laughter, his small daily routines, the way he had once run to her with stories of triumphs and frustrations, they all crowded her mind, making the absence of his presence sharp and painful. What if something escalated here in the parking lot while she was alone? What if no one intervened? What if she were powerless to protect herself? The questions swirled with relentless intensity, each one tightening the coil of anxiety in her chest. The shoppers passing by seemed oblivious, focused on their own errands, their own worlds, yet Marilyn imagined their judgment anyway. In her mind, she could hear the faint whisper of imagined voices, the subtle shifting of eyes, the assumptions they might make about why a police officer had approached her in that way. She envisioned their silent questions, the doubts they might harbor about her behavior, as if the burden of proof for her dignity rested solely on her shoulders. The humiliation was compounded not just by the insult itself, but by the suffocating awareness that society often blamed the victim. Marilyn's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the straps of her purse, the simple act of holding on becoming an anchor. Every instinct screamed to shrink, to make herself smaller, to disappear under the weight of scrutiny and authority. Yet the very thought of giving in to that fear made her chest tighten further. She felt a raw, aching vulnerability, one that was difficult to name. It was not just about embarrassment. It was about the realization that in this world, power could be wielded unfairly, that someone with a title and uniform could dictate her experience, regardless of what was right. Her mind wandered to Jamal again, picturing his steady hands, his determination, the sense of responsibility he carried even in small things. A surge of longing mixed with worry. He wasn't here to shield her, to be the protector she wished he could be. The absence of her son accentuated the helplessness of the moment. She had always been strong, always relied on her own resilience. But this confrontation exposed the fragility she rarely allowed herself to feel. Her body, poised and composed in public, felt like a fragile vessel for all the raw emotions she carried inside. For a moment, Marilyn closed her eyes and let herself acknowledge the depth of the pain, the fear, the anger, the humiliation, the vulnerability. She didn't need to diminish it or hide it. She could feel it fully, and in doing so, she began to understand its power. It was the fuel for the courage she would need, the fire that could turn fear into action when the time came. The injustice had struck hard, but her awareness of it, her refusal to ignore it, planted the seed of resolve. The world had attempted to make her feel small, but even in that moment of pain, she realized she had not disappeared. As she reopened her eyes and glanced around the parking lot, Marilyn understood something essential. The pain was real, but it would not define her. The humiliation and vulnerability were undeniable, but they also illuminated the strength she would need. And in that painful awareness, a quiet determination began to take shape, one that would prepare her for the moment when justice, or at least her son's presence, would arrive to shift the balance. The tension in the parking lot was almost tangible. Marilyn Jackson's chest still tightened from the earlier encounter, and the weight of helplessness pressed on her shoulders. She had felt powerless, exposed, and humiliated, but then, without warning, the sharp sound of tires squealing on asphalt cut through the air. Heads turned, carts rattled, and a black SUV came into view, moving swiftly toward the row of parked cars. Marilyn's heart skipped a beat, her instincts alert to every movement. Something in the way the vehicle approached, deliberate and purposeful, made her pulse quicken. The SUV stopped with a measured authority, doors swinging open in unison, and there he was, Jamal. But this wasn't the young man who had waved goodbye weeks ago before leaving for college. This Jamal was different, transformed in a way that made Marilyn momentarily breathless. He was clad in full SWAT gear, the tactical vest gleaming in the morning sun, helmet snug over his head, gloves gripping a radio at his side. Each piece of equipment spoke of preparation, training, and competence. His stance was controlled, confident, and unwavering, a stark contrast to the fear and vulnerability she had just endured. Marilyn's eyes met his, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she felt the hope she had been missing surge inside her. A wave of relief, almost electric in its intensity, coursed through her body. Jamal's presence was more than comfort. It was a symbol of protection, strength, and resilience. The imagined helplessness of the past minutes began to dissolve, replaced by the undeniable feeling that the balance of power was shifting. Here was her son, fully capable and unafraid, ready to intervene in a way that she could not. Her mind raced, piecing together how this moment had come to be. Jamal had joined the county's tactical response unit earlier than she had expected, dedicating months to rigorous training that pushed his body and mind to the limits. She remembered the countless evenings he had spent running drills in the yard, studying protocols and speaking passionately about his desire to serve and protect. And now, by sheer coincidence, or perhaps by fate, he was nearby, perfectly positioned to respond. The thought alone made Marilyn's chest feel lighter, as if the air itself carried a newfound energy. For the first time since the confrontation, Marilyn straightened her posture, letting her shoulders roll back, feeling the weight of her fear lift. The earlier humiliation, though still vivid, began to transform into a quiet determination. Seeing Jamal ready, unshaken, prepared to confront the situation without aggression but with authority, gave her courage she hadn't realized she possessed. It was as if his arrival had opened a door in her mind, a doorway to resilience, self-respect, and the possibility that justice could be upheld. She observed Jamal carefully, noting the calm precision in his movements. There was no panic, no hesitation, only controlled professionalism, Even the simple act of adjusting his radio strap seemed deliberate, purposeful, a signal that he was aware of the stakes and ready to act if necessary. Marilyn felt a swell of pride mixed with relief. This was the son she had raised, the young man who had learned to carry responsibility and face challenges head-on. But more than that, he was someone who could confront the injustice she had endured without fear. The moment stretched, yet in its extension, Marilyn felt a subtle shift within herself. The hopelessness of the earlier confrontation melted into a quiet but firm resolve. She would not cower. She would not be diminished. The presence of Jamal reminded her that courage could arrive in many forms, sometimes in the guise of those we love, sometimes in the embodiment of training, preparation, and determination. In that instant, Marilyn understood something profound. Injustice had met its match. And while fear had once gripped her heart, hope now flowed in, steady and unyielding. Whatever came next, she would face it standing tall, strengthened not only by her son's arrival, but by the knowledge that she was no longer alone. Whitman's confident stride faltered the moment Jamal stepped forward. The commanding presence of the young man in full SWAT gear seemed to shift the atmosphere in the parking lot instantly. Where there had once been arrogance and a sense of entitlement, there was now hesitation, a subtle flicker of uncertainty in the officer's eyes. Whitman's usual bravado, so carefully honed behind the shield of his uniform, wavered under the silent authority radiating from Jamal. The transformation was almost imperceptible to anyone else, but Marilyn noticed it immediately. Jamal didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. The straight lines of his posture, the steady set of his shoulders, the deliberate calm in his movements communicated enough. It wasn't intimidation in the sense of aggression. It was the quiet, unshakable assurance of someone trained to handle difficult situations with precision and control. The mere presence of her son shifted the balance of power, and Marilyn felt a sense of relief she hadn't known she could experience so quickly. For the first time in hours, she could breathe freely. Jamal's eyes softened as they met hers. "Mom," he said, his voice calm, grounding, filled with the assurance that she was safe. Marilyn felt the tension that had gripped her chest begin to dissolve, replaced by warmth and gratitude. The fear that had shadowed her since Whitman's initial insult receded like a tide, leaving behind a surge of hope and confidence. She realized she had not been powerless after all. She had the presence of mind to endure, to stand firm, and now, with Jamal beside her, she could finally confront the injustice without hesitation. Turning to Whitman, Jamal spoke with a clarity and authority that commanded attention. Every word carried the weight of training, procedure, and unyielding principle. There was no malice, no overreaction, just the measured enforcement of accountability. Whitman's expression tightened. He shifted uncomfortably, caught in the unmistakable recognition that his actions were not beyond reproach. The officer attempted to respond, to regain control, but the quiet power of Jamal's presence rendered his protests unnecessary. Observers in the parking lot paused, sensing the gravity of the moment, watching as the scales of authority were realigned by integrity and courage. Within minutes, the situation was under formal control. An official report was filed, documenting the incident in clear, precise language. Whitman was instructed to step aside to await further review, and the unmistakable message was clear. Abuse of authority would not go unchecked. The bystanders who had witnessed the confrontation from a distance began to murmur, some quietly applauding, others nodding in recognition of what had just transpired. It was not just a personal victory for Marilyn and Jamal. It was a visible demonstration that justice could prevail even in moments when power seemed misused. Marilyn stepped forward, enveloping her son in a hug that carried every ounce of relief, pride, and love she had felt building since the start of the day. Her chest swelled with emotion, tears pricked at her eyes, not from sorrow, but from a profound sense of gratitude and awe. She realized in that embrace that strength could be born from fear, that courage could emerge from the shadows of intimidation, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, could shine brightly even in the darkest corners of life. The morning's events, which had begun with humiliation and despair, now concluded with empowerment and hope. Marilyn's heart felt lighter, her spirit unburdened, and she knew this experience would linger, not as a memory of degradation, but as a testament to resilience and integrity. The story of a mother's pain and a son's determination had transformed into a narrative of triumph, a demonstration that standing tall, advocating for what is right, and supporting one another could change the course of a moment, a day, and perhaps even a community. As she held Jamal, watching the final interactions unfold between Whitman and the authorities, Marilyn understood something deeper than personal relief. This was more than a victory. It was inspiration. Courage and justice were not abstract ideals. They were living forces, made real by those willing to act. In that quiet, sunlit parking lot, humiliation had been replaced by dignity, fear by hope, and isolation by the unshakable presence of family and principle. The lesson was clear. Strength, when guided by integrity, could illuminate even the most shadowed corners of life.